Deconstruction, deconversion, and objections to Christianity. These have taken center stage lately, and ever more so as more and more of our young people have identified as nones, as people who have left either evangelicalism or the church more broadly. Hi folks, I'm Lenny Esposito with another Come Let Us Reason Together, and today we're going to be bringing a special guest on, Dr. Bobby Conway, who will discuss doubt, deconversion, and Christianity, and see where those things are either in conflict or how Christianity maybe can help resolve one's doubt in the face of difficulty and trial. All of this coming up on the next Come Let Us Reason Together. Well, hello again, everyone. Nice to have you again here at Come Let Us Reason Together. And today I'm joined by my friend, Dr. Bobby Conway. Bobby and I have known each other, at least a decade or so. And he has been an apologist, a pastor, a social media influencer with his 1 minute apologist clips for many years now. He's interestingly an author as well. His most recent book, Christianity Still Makes Sense, and his ministry is of that name as well, where he's going to talk about his journey, how he's been concerned about those who are leaving the church, and also his personal experience of going through a time of significant doubt in his life. So first of all, I want to welcome you, Bobby. Glad to have you here. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. It's good to be with you, Lenny. I know that we got the chance, I think we met in Israel the first time with Dr. William Lane Craig many years ago.
That's right.
Yeah, what a great trip that was. So my story, Lenny, is I grew up in California and I never heard about Jesus and the gospel, obviously hearing the name Jesus, but never heard the gospel till I was 19. And I, at that time of my life, was struggling with alcoholism, promiscuity, just totally uneducated, screwing around all the time, getting in trouble. And I was collecting a lot of guilt through my lifestyle. And I had a college baseball teammate take me to hear Greg Laurie on a Monday night at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And it was through listening to Greg Laurie that I ended up placing my faith in the Lord, got saved. Eventually, I ended up getting clean and sober. And I felt a call and a tug to ministry. I'd go off to Bible college, get married to my wife. We'd start having kids, go to seminary. And when I got out of Dallas Seminary, I started a church. And at that stage in my life, when I started a church, I had experienced a little bit of disruption as it relates to doubts. But for the most part, I had a really solid, committed walk with Christ, was on fire. My life was transformed. I just wanted to tell everybody about Jesus. But then I started to struggle more into the pastorate. I worked on a doctorate of ministry under Geisler at Southern Evangelical Seminary in apologetics. And then I would go on to work on a PhD in philosophy of religion from the University of Birmingham in England. And somewhere in that arena, I just found myself in the deep waters of doubt, where I would go into a several-year battle where God would eventually bring me out of a trial where I was asking the question, does Christianity still make sense? Is it worth staying put?
Wow. Yeah, there's quite a lot there. So first of all, a couple of questions. When was your Monday night experience with Greg? Because I don't know if you know this or not, but I taught at Greg Laurie's church for 11 years. I had an apologetics class there and had been actually also playing on the worship team there. And I'd go down on certain Monday nights to Costa Mesa. Not a lot, but I'm just kind of wondering if we were maybe crossing paths and not knowing it.
I know, right? So my time frame, Lenny, it would have been about 1993 and 1994, and maybe even a little bit in 95 that I was going to those Monday nights.
Okay, I mean, I was on the team, but that's when Greg first started his Monday nights over there in Costa Mesa. Chuck had been doing some things, but that's when he first kind of established it, if I remember right. That's great. That's great. So here's a question though. So you say that you are a committed believer, you're going along, and then you go to school, and all of a sudden you get all of this doubt. Was it the schooling that kind of prompted the doubt? Was it something else happening in your life? Was it a shifting of your beliefs? How did that come about?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when I think back on that, Lenny, it wasn't like a moral issue. I wasn't, involved in any like egregious kind of behavior like pornography behind the scenes, or I almost spilt my coffee on me right there. So I wasn't looking at pornography behind the scenes. I wasn't, screwing around doing anything. Like, obviously we're all sinners, but there was nothing that was just like of a moral nature that was causing me to think, oh, maybe you would like a better worldview that could suit my, my vices. It really, when I look back, Lenny, I committed my life to Christ because I wanted to, offload the guilt. And when you become a Christian, I was 19 when I got saved. You don't really know what questions to ask at that age.
Yeah.
You might be asking, like, what's my purpose in life? And that was a question. And what do I do with my guilt? And those were kind of my two big questions. Boy, if I could have some purpose and get rid of my guilt. And Jesus really answered that for me in eradicating my guilt and giving me purpose. And so what happened is, I like to say, depending upon the denomination that you get a part of or the church that you belong to, you'll get put in a particular doctrinal box. Well, I went off to Bible college, Lenny, in Arkansas, and I didn't know how to pick a college for the life of me at that stage. I just ended up at this little Baptist Bible college, but man, there was some real legalism there. And I wasn't exposed a lot to the different views. And so I just thought, okay, I'm a disciple. I need to listen. And, I would hear the one view on things, and I just bought into it. Well, then you go off to seminary, and at Dallas, they did a good job of exposing you to the different views. So I found that a lot of the views that I committed to prematurely on not being aware of alternative options before committing. So you go through that process enough, and that can really begin to break you down. And so at this stage, as a father, as a pastor, I've really tried to emphasize, don't try to conquer learning. Enjoy it. Know that there's lots of options out there. Take your time learning the different options. And then after you went through that process, make a decision, but don't freak out at these different options. And so I think that's the trapping. If you have an analytical student in a Bible college and he's a thinker, well, he's going to start pressing up against these borders. And I felt like I got duped on some of these viewpoints. And then that was happening with the viewpoints on Christianity. And then I started thinking like this, well, I became a Christian at such a young age, and I never really gave thought to the different philosophical thoughts out there. How do I know I got it right? Like, was that a good process just to commit to something when I didn't even know what questions to ask? And so then I felt overwhelmed, like, boy, I got to go on this, I got to go study Nietzsche, and I got to figure out, the different philosophical thinkers who have influenced, the world of ideas. And I would just start panicking. And part of the problem, I think, too, Lenny, so I was incredibly curious, and I still am to this day, but you couple a very curious, analytical brain with a tendency toward OCD and an anxiety disorder. And this means that you've got a person who doesn't always know how to unlock from his obsessive thinking, and he gets anxious about thoughts that unsettle him. And that was me. And I think that is kind of the makeup of those who get into a unbelievable, overwhelming crisis of faith. And for me, I had suicidal ideation. I ended up in counseling. I ended up on antidepressants. This went on for years, Lenny, before I finally would get a breakthrough.
Wow. There's so much there. And Gosh, where do we start? Everything from how youth groups maybe shape our initial understanding and oversimplify our faith, to the idea that, I always tell a lot of people, you don't know what you don't know. In other words, you can be assured of this story because it sounds right, but you don't even know that there are not merely alternative explanations, but there are specific problems that you're not even considering as part of the solution. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to learn everything about everything in order to come to a reasonable conclusion. That's not true either. So and then the whole idea of, because I'm a Christian, either I shouldn't have doubts anymore or go through a crisis, in struggling and understanding my faith, or that God will deliver me from things like depression. I mean, there's just all of that is kind of wrapped up into this. So why don't we take it? I think we should take it into two parts. Let's take the analytical side first, and then we'll talk about the emotional, because I think a lot of deconstruction is happening on the emotional level as much as it is on the analytical level. So on the analytical side, now you've gone through this, you have kids. How do you approach Christianity to the younger generation through ministry, how do you recommend for youth groups, and how do you approach it for your own kids so that they don't get caught in this same concept of where they're told something and they feel like, hey, maybe I was deceived? How do you go about that?
Sure. So what I've done with my kids in particular, I was really specific about this because, I'm in a place in the middle of these doubts where Christianity doesn't make sense. And, I'm putting out videos. I'm, as an apologist, I'm preaching week by week. And in some ways, I just felt like a fraud. But I would say in my heart, Lenny, like, Lord, I don't know what else to do. On one side, it felt really irresponsible just to quit my life that I'd prepared for because I was in a dark night of the soul. I felt that there would be a moral responsibility if I came to the end of this journey and outright rejected Christianity. But all I knew to do was press forward by faith in the middle of it. And I took comfort in knowing that Jesus can handle my doubts, like with John the Baptist and the way that he dealt with him. I knew that he could discern the difference between the person who just doubts because they want to celebrate it and move beyond their faith, and the person who is a sincere doubter, just struggling because for every book that I read to resolve my doubts, I ended up collecting another 10 books that I needed to read, and it would create more in me. So I had to learn how to live with doubts and with questions, which we can distinguish. But as a parent, I was finding myself in the middle of this going, wow, if I walk away from this, what am I going to be able to offer my kids? Like, they're going to feel duped. And then I started thinking about, like, what would that mean for me as a parent? Like, how am I going to raise my kids? What am I going to teach them? How do I help them to understand values and stuff? And so on a lot of ways, Lenny, it was like, wow, I really appreciate what the Christian worldview offers me as a dad. I mean, it gives me a way to help my kids understand an identity. It helps them to understand, who they are in Christ. It helps them to understand some relational principles about how to go to the distance through forgiveness and unconditional love. And so I was appreciative of that. But what I did tell the kids is I said, Lenny, I'd say this too. It was very important to me to be able to be authentic. And I struggled with a version of Christianity that I felt like it looked fake sometimes. Like everybody had to show up and act like we're all on fire for Jesus and act like we all have our doctrines in place. And to me, a mature Christian early on was just, you figure out what your doctrines are, and then you know it. And so I wanted to be able to authentically show up, not to disrupt people, but I felt like, man, what would it look like to have a community of people that if I read a book and it jars me, that I could just share. And so I started thinking about how can we create a church culture that welcomes people's questions and doubts, Jude says, be merciful to those who doubt. So I started with saying to my kids, you're always welcome to come to the table with your doubts, with your questions. Dad loves you. I don't want you to feel like you don't have a place for that. But I also think I can protect you from having a lot of doubts by just saying, know that there's lots of different views out there. And what else would you expect with 2,000 years of church history and a bunch of brains looking over, or minds looking over the Bible? And so I said, that what else would you have? I said, you can't even get to the evening news without a bunch of different interpretations emerging on the day of an event. So I would start helping them think like that. And then I said, here's what I would want you to do, kids. So I said, enjoy learning. Don't try to conquer it. And know that there's lots of views out there. So they took that advice. The other thing, as I said, well, how then can you live out this Christian worldview? I said, focus on this. Love God, love people, celebrate the gospel. And that was great commandment. Love God, love people, and great commission. Celebrate the gospel. And I said, if you'll just focus on that, I said, then you can just go through this journey. And that's the way I've tried to simplify it for my kids. And it's my son has told me on different occasions that the worldview that he was given, that it helped him so much. And I'm so thankful, because I just don't want them to have to get wrecked. Lenny, I've been saying this on some interviews lately. I'm not saying that there's not people out there. I just don't know of another Christian that was so tortured by doubt than I was, of the people I've counseled through the years, I've interacted with, and came through to tell the story and not ended up as a Rhett and Link.
Yeah, I don't know if you've spoken with Mike Lacona, but Mike is another guy who thinks quite a bit, and he takes his doubts very seriously. I call it the Hamlet Complex. Hamlet was always overthinking everything. And that's even his soliloquy when he goes, maybe, should we live or should we die, right? Whether it's better to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or maybe we should just end it all and sleep. But wait, if you sleep, then maybe you'll dream. And what happens after? And wait, so every choice he makes, he has to have, wait a minute, what happens, and he goes on and on and on about it. But
Mike was actually very helpful. And I'd say if he is the one person that I would say that I would think of that was really wrecked by it. And man, I can just remember jumping on the phone with Mike, and he was just such an encouragement to me, because he didn't freak out. And it's very lonely when you're doubting and you're a pastor, because you don't want to share your doubts with people, because you're like, oh man, what if they start assuming these doubts as well? And so that was the other responsibility. I felt like, man, I got to verbally process what I feel, but what if I mess other people up? So then it just felt like, well, maybe I just need to take my life, because that might be bad, but maybe it's less bad than causing other people to potentially become apostate. So, I mean, it was horrible.
Yeah, that's quite a bit. Of course, when we look at these things, there's a couple of aspects to our culture, I think, that play a part in this. And I think a lot of young people who are deconstructing their faith have a mistaken identity of what even it means to know something. They have a bad, what we call it epistemology, a bad understanding of what knowledge means. They think you have to be certain of something to know it, and that's definitely not true. So for Christianity, I've compared it, and atheists always have challenged me with things like, well, how do you know that Christianity is true unless you've explored everything else out there? And I ask them, I say, do you go to a doctor? How do you know that Western medicine is true unless you've explored all? Have you been to a witch doctor? Have you tried Eastern holistic practice? And what you say is, well, one of the things that we can do is say, on the majors, are we seeing progress in, say, modern medicine? Are we finding that we're solving things more than not? Yes, that doesn't mean Western medicine's right on everything, but it means it's showing that there's a trustworthy process in play. And with Christianity, I find that it explains the world, like you said, the Christian worldview, in a better way. They're not difficulties that we wave away. There are certainly difficulties with it, but overall, it fits together well, and it explains why people act the way they do, why they regress, why in the 21st century we can have a group that commits atrocities that were akin to the way the Assyrians came in and committed atrocities in warfare, and how you can revert. Just, it explains a lot of those things better than the contemporaries. So I don't necessarily need to examine every single faith. I don't have to find, sit with the Native Americans in this one
Right.
I can understand that. But if there's something that's challenging, we definitely want to look into it. But we can start with the broad questions, such as, polytheism versus monotheism. That's an easy one to distinguish against. If you're polytheistic, how does that work? How can God have something greater than himself? And does that make God contingent then? So right, polytheism has an internal contradiction to it. So, okay, well, now if monotheism makes more sense than polytheism, I've eliminated the vast majority of faiths across the globe. So I'm on my way. So you don't need to necessarily answer every question, but you need to at least take a step and say, is this going in the right direction?
Yeah, that's so well said. And that kind of thinking is very helpful. But, I would, the kind of process that I was going in, doubt can be the making of an apologist. I mean, that's for sure, because it stretches your thinking. And I would find myself, when I had questions, for example, about maybe the problem of evil, I would think like this: okay, what worldview would I go to that I think could resolve this better for me?
Yes, exactly.
And so I would literally think about, well, to walk away from Christianity is not to escape doubts. It's just to head toward another worldview where I'm going to inherit another set. So let me try to think ahead of time what that might look like. And what I found was, I would do things like, okay, on atheism, they're going to say, well, how could a God be good and allow for the Holocaust to happen and not intervene? Well, then I think, okay, God didn't intervene maybe when we would have liked. We don't know how he was intervening in, individual ways, but I would say in a collective way, maybe we would like to see a quicker intervention. But if I go to atheism, then there is no justice for Hitler. So on Christianity, I might not get justice when I want it, but I have the promise that there is ultimate justice for a Hitler because God is just. So it's not like I walk away and resolve my problem on atheism. And so there's things that atheism can explain that Christianity can't explain. And so I just started thinking like that. And then I just started realizing, you know what? Why are we always on the defense as Christians? Because these other worldviews, they've got their own problems as well. And I've thought through some of the things that I would inherit. And I think I'd just be able to sit better. And I came to the point where I said, I think I'm really struggling with the fact that I'm not omniscient. I don't like living an existence with so much uncertainty. I wish that I could have a sense of certainty about things. I wish things felt clearer to me. It scares me, the unknown. I panic. I mean, I can have a panic attack. I can remember going to bed one night and I started thinking about that I'm moving on a blue chunk of rock at a speed so unbelievably fast that I don't even realize what's going on. And I just started freaking out. And I know that sounds crazy, but I just am aware of how out of control I am. And I take comfort in knowing that God's got this. And if I start to think he doesn't, I don't know how to really cope the best.
Yeah. Again, you're in good company. This is very much Martin Luther's problem as well, right? When he was, and that's what drove him away from the Catholic Church, because he started going over and over about there's no way God, given the theology of that day and indulgences and things like that, he just continued to worry about until he stumbled on the just shall live by faith, and he says, there's the answer.
Yes.
So then I would say, because youth groups have often been criticized, especially in apologetic circles, as being reduced to kind of pizza parties, movie nights, kind of affirming what I call catchphrase Christianity, the bumper sticker slogan version of Christianity, without allowing the kids to kind of deeply explore some of these aspects of their faith. And I think, as you point out, it can do a little bit of a disservice. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say, hey, we recognize these questions are there. I don't think we want to hide them from kids, because what I've read in the testimonies of those who, deconstruct their faith is they felt like they were given a bait and switch. They felt like they were deceived because they gave this kind of this plasticine idea of what Christianity is. And then when they started digging up these questions, they wouldn't make the distinction between, say, a primary, an essential belief and a secondary belief. They throw the whole thing out. And I worry that that's part of the problem with modern evangelicalism today. Everybody needs to be, like you said, they have to put this persona on, right? We're all what we call Pinterest perfect. It's like, yeah. You have your Bible here and your coffee cup here and the pen is placed just so, and the hashtag morning devotions blessed, that kind of thing. And we all know that that's not true, because we know that just outside the frame, the bed is unmade and the dog has made a mess on the carpet, but we don't show that. That's all cropped out. And people live their lives in church that way. And it's funny that one of our commands is to confess our sins one to another. So we know that there's this mutual accountability, mutual reliance one to another, so that we don't kind of fall into that trap. But we tend not to do that. It's a little more uncomfortable to share our weaknesses and our doubts, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. I think what helped me with that is transparency became my survival medicine. When I got clean, Lenny, I did over 400 meetings of sobriety in my first year at 21 years of age. So it took me about a year and a half after becoming a Christian to finally surrender the alcohol. And the meetings that I was attending, you just got to be real if you want to get clean. And so I say transparency is my survival medicine. And so there's got to be a way for us to be authentic as Christians. But it's not like I'm trying to say, oh, live your truth. Like I want to be able to recognize that, I know that I'm called to live out God's truth for me, but I want to be authentic with my struggle to get there, to surrender to that, with my questions in the midst of the journey. And so when I'm reading the Old Testament and there's things that we talk about a lot as apologists, like, the faith is reasonable. And I believe that. And Christianity makes sense. And I believe that. But Christianity also doesn't make sense to me. And faith is also not reasonable in the sense of like Ezekiel laying on his side for 390 days and, Naaman dipping in the river the way that he did. And, Isaiah walking in his garments are naked and, floating manna and Shamgar taking out 300 people with an ox goad. So there was a lot of bizarre stuff in the Bible that I just couldn't relate to. And it almost challenged my reason, like, this doesn't make sense to me. So I needed an apologetic for the nonsense, for the seemingly absurd. And because that was one of my big intellectual hangups, was all the stuff that I would read and I would think, okay, I know that I'm removed from this, but this is really weird. Like Elisha being called, bald head, and then bears come out and maul the 42 kids. How do I deal with this, Lord? Or David, calling for a census, and then all these people are hosed as a result. So I really would feel the text and feel the word, and but I would try to surrender to that. But I wanted to be able to say, look, I want to say that I believe this, and by faith I'm saying I believe this, but my I don't understand it, and it's really challenging to me to put this together. And I'm not wanting to be a hindrance to the church, but I do want to be authentic about what's going on my insides. And so I found myself processing that way, and I process that way with my kids. I process that way at the church. I end all of my services where I pastor with 15 to 20 minutes of live Q&A. And that's become one of the things the church loves a bunch. I'd say, ask your questions on doubts and philosophy and whatever. Let's just talk. If I don't know the answer, I'll say it. But I would say, even for parents, Lenny, that if they're looking for a resource, my book, Does Christianity Still Make Sense, also has a study guide companion with it.
Oh, that's great.
And my son and I was flown up to Tyndale, and Tyndale has a 6-part video series that we did. And so it's a Gen Zer, my son, interviewing his old man, and we're just talking about deconstruction and doubt and how it's playing out amongst his age, and he's sharing things. And I think it could be a great tool for moms and dads to sit and go through with their kids, or for student groups, youth groups, to talk about this, and even regular small groups in the church.
So what do you make of some of the celebrity, quote unquote, Christians who have deconverted? Of course, Rhett and Link had a huge podcast. You have several musicians, worship leaders, John Steingard, folks.
Yeah. Lots of them.
How do you address those in your book? Do you talk about some of this idea, and what do you say?
Yeah, I do. I talk about the deconstruction that's taken place, and how challenging this is in our culture. I just listened actually to Rhett and Link. I wish I'd have listened to that before I wrote the book. I hadn't listened. I heard their names come up, but I actually did it this week. I was listening to their stuff, and I felt a couple things in listening to their deconversion and deconstruction stories. It was more like I felt a little bit of just the trauma acting up, because some of the leftover PTSD. I mean, I've been out of this battle now for about 8 years, I would say, where God just really would bring me through that dark night of the soul. And I've been able to really be in a place of rest in my faith. And I'm very thankful for that. But I found myself feeling that vulnerable feeling, because it reminded me of, just some of the pain that I went through, especially Rhett. I related so much to his journey and his questions and where he was at. And I've been reflecting about him and what happened there. And I just thought about that myself. And I thought, I think he was influenced more than he realizes by the culture that we live in, by secularism.
Yeah, so true.
And so I think that to me was the big thing. And the other thing that I just, at the end of the day, he felt like he was being authentic and in his pursuit of truth. And I don't question his feelings on that matter. I just feel like it's sad where he ended up to me, because I know I could have been there. He seems very likable. I felt his heart in it. But I really do think that the things that were bothering both of them were showing how much they're a product of our culture. And for me, I just take comfort in knowing that I don't want to take comfort in my own observations, that the world of thought is bigger than me. And I'm not comfortable giving myself to ideologies that are just emerging on the scene right now in human history. I would rather believe that if God exists, that he's revealed himself a long time ago. And I want to figure out how to hold on to that community and realize that, while I want to be authentic, I don't want to be so authentic that I lose sight of a community that I'm willing to trust and get outside of myself. And I think Christianity is got its issues, but as a cumulative case, pound per pound compared to the other worldviews, if I think about what Rhett's inheriting with all the agnosticism and stuff, he feels free, but feeling free doesn't mean you are free. And I have to know that as well.
Oh, that's so important. Yeah, it's we are definitely living in an age where, because we are, to use a phrase that Charles Taylor has popularized, we're living in a disenchanted world. That Taylor uses that phrase to say we don't believe in powers higher than ourselves anymore. It's the world of modernism seems to make for all practical purposes. I mean, sure, yeah, there's a lot of people who talk about a deity, but they don't live like they are subjected to a God who can strike them down at any moment. They live like, I'm in control of my own destiny, and if I want to change my body, I can change my body because we have medical technology in order to deliver us. Like, we are the sum total of all that we have, and it's because we live in this world that allows a lot of these doubts to come up, and as you say, guys like Rhett, they can easily dismiss this because they don't think that there's anything, they live in a society where it's not just assumed that, hey, there's something more. You would have thought that with COVID, for example, that there was a moment where that humbled everybody. It's like, oh, we aren't in control anymore. Something can happen, but then you get the COVID vaccine and the powers that be went into full overdrive. So no, we're still in control. We still got it. Yeah, you've got to do these things, but we're still in control. And it's almost like we missed the teachable point in the whole thing. I do tell you that I didn't go through quite the level of struggle that you did, but when our third child was being ready to be born, my wife went into a crisis. We almost lost her. She had a condition called HELP syndrome, hemolysis enlarged liver, low platelets, and it's the doctor said, well, the next step after this is death, right? So they had to. I thought we were driving to the hospital to deliver a baby. Turns out, no, she wasn't having labor pains. Her liver was shutting down. Basically, 3/4 of her blood was replaced with water. She was under life supplying levels of oxygen. It was bad. And I remember sitting in the darkened delivery room where the delivery should have been, right? While they wheeled her into the operating room. They had to take the baby out in 1:37 seconds. That's how fast they did the C-section.
Wow.
Yeah. And I remember just sitting there in a darkened room, and I'm waiting now for hours. The baby was only 3 pounds, 15 ounces, the whole bit. And I'm going, what just happened? What? I was expecting this to be a joyous time, and all of a sudden it's a huge crisis. And you start, unfortunately, and this is true with most Christians, they don't examine their faith until they hit one of these crisis points. And that's the worst time to start asking these questions because you're so emotionally involved, But I remember thinking, what if my prayers are only hitting the ceiling? What if that's all that there is? What if, And then two things came to my mind. I said, I can't doubt that God exists. I've looked into it too much. I've read the best guys on the other side, and I don't find their answers compelling. It doesn't. Why do we have what we have? Why is there something rather than nothing? I can't doubt that. And then I remember, and I can't doubt that Jesus rose from the dead. Of all historical facts and understandings, there's just no way to make sense of that other than Jesus rose from the dead. There's no way to make sense of the aftermath even of it. And so I don't know what's going on, but I know those two things are true. And if I have that, that's enough to get me through. And that was kind of how I sustained myself through that. So again, you don't have to answer everything, but those are a couple of pretty big points.
Yeah. And, Lenny, that's what I found with my journey as well. What helped me, it was the resurrection. It was obviously God's existence as well. But the resurrection of Jesus, the thinking was, well, if Jesus rose from the grave, if he really rose from the grave, then he really did die. And if he really did die, he really did live. And when he really did live, he said he was going to die and rise again. And when he really did live, he affirmed the Old Testament and he promised that there's more to come. So then I started thinking, well, if Jesus validated the Old Testament in his first coming, then I can put faith in the fact that in his second coming, he'll validate that the New Testament came together. And so out of the resurrection, I could go back to his death, his life, and realize that if the Old Testament that he affirmed, and if he's God and rose from the grave, then those bizarre passages that don't make sense to me, well, it makes sense to me that he rose from the grave, and if it's good enough for him, it needs to be good enough for me. And then I thought I can even get back to the past and I can go to the future, and realizing as I have my hope in his second coming that he'll validate the process of the new, that came together as well. And so it's amazing how the resurrection helped me to go back and go forward, and it allowed me just to find a place of rest again. And so the irony in all of it, it wasn't another book. It wasn't some overwhelming apologetic. It was just the linchpin of Christianity, the resurrection, 1 Corinthians 15, and having faith like a child in the simple gospel, in the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, that I realized that I went into the faith and it was simple, and I ended up in a lot of doubts because I worried that it was too simple, and then I overcomplicated it, and then I had to get simple again, and then I found a place of rest.
Yeah. So on the other side, on the emotional side, how would you approach someone who's having these struggles, who really feels, because feelings play such a big part in our society now. So how do you talk about the emotional aspect of this process, and how we can be swept up, in an emotive decision by feeling either that we were misled, or by feeling that because we can't have assurance, maybe so, do you get pushback from when you talk with people who are having these struggles?
Yeah, Gary Habermas was very helpful to me too during my season of doubt, the great resurrection scholar. And, he kind of guided me to a book, and I don't remember the name of it offhand, but it was kind of getting into some of the, cognitive therapy stuff where you're really trying to catch your thoughts and seeing how your thoughts influence your feelings. And I started even considering some of the counseling approaches, like what would be the best approach for me, because I basically got into a bad loop with my thinking. I was very obsessive. I talk about a certain type of doubter in my book, Doubting Toward Faith, that really gets bogged down, and it's the obsessive analyzer. So you take somebody who's obsessive, but they don't really analyze. They might not have an existential crisis because they might not be obsessing on intellectual things. But you get somebody that's an analyzer, like a William Lane Craig, but he's not, obsessive. He can detach himself from some of the issues without getting caught up in some emotional trial. But the obsessive analyzer can get locked in, and it really starts to play on the emotional level. So sometimes we're looking at a mental health condition, and this is where I've been doing some thinking, Lenny, how our mental health issues can contribute to our doubt. So what does doubt look like for somebody with OCD tendencies? Well, they might struggle getting in a locked-in loop where they get stuck, like an addict that can't let go. How does doubt emotionally trap the person with anxiety and depression? Well, they can move towards hopeless feelings really quick. I think I would try to figure out somebody's mental health condition. I would ask questions to figure out, like, let's just get this trial off the doubts for a moment in the Bible. How do you process emotion just in general? Do you typically move toward anxiety and depression? Do you typically fixate? Do you turn to things to try to cope like an addict? And so if I can get aware, then maybe I can help them to see that they're still running that same pattern with their emotions in the arena of doubt. So then I'm able to say, well, maybe if we could treat the anxiety a little bit, or maybe if we could treat some of the OCD stuff, well, then that can allow you to unlock a little bit so that you can take some rest from this. Or if we can deal with some of the underlying anxiety, well, then maybe you won't panic while you're doubting. You can just go through this journey without having that. Or if you suffer with depression and you're prone toward hopelessness, so that's some of the stuff that I think needs to be done, even in the apologetic world. It's where mental health and in the way that people are wired plays a particular role in how they experience doubt when it comes their way.
Yeah, we are obviously living in an age where feelings have been elevated. Interesting in Abigail Schreier's new book, Bad Therapy. I've not read the whole book yet, but there is a point that she does make, that she says, you have a generation or maybe two generations who have been taught since early childhood to focus on their feelings. How does that make you feel? And throughout school and growing up, it's always about, your feelings. And so she says, is it no wonder that when you become adults, you place this inordinate emphasis on what you feel? Because it's the only thing you can't fake. You know what you feel. You feel what you feel. Unfortunately, our feelings can lie to us from time to time as well. And that's a part that we don't hear about much. And sometimes the best answer, isn't, how does that make you feel? It's like, well, maybe you need to do it regardless of how you feel, or maybe you need to think about it even though you feel this way. And you'll find that your actions, and I'm sure Habermas's book, I know JP's book on depression and doubt does a really good job of this as well. He gives you certain exercises to change your feelings, that you can actually be in control of your feelings. You shouldn't let your feelings be in control of you. And I think that's, again, as you're saying, that's a message that maybe we in a Christian ministry need to start understanding and adopting a little bit more, as our culture puts such emphasis on feelings.
Yeah. And so even like the marketing that has happened in our culture, we have been mass marketed with all things LGBTQ. And, the marketing, it's been all about softening us, creating, sentiment. And man, I'll tell you what, like, here would be an example of going, I know what the Bible teaches on it, that sex is between a man and a woman in the context of marriage, and that's God's ideal plan. My emotions at times can feel a lot of compassion when I hear the stories of people that will say, oh, you know what, I'm gay and I just want to know love, and I want to love somebody else. I get what it's like to have my emotions want to say, well, if I was God, I would say, what difference does it make? Love who you want to love. And I think that's something I have to be aware of, that how much our culture has moved us through music and through entertainment and through the films to soften us. And that can become really dangerous, because if you get to that place where I think it's good to feel empathy for people's struggles and compassion for them, I think one of the dangers that some of these people who deconstruct, they go to, is they end up letting their feelings, to your point, lead all the way. And I think that we can be authentic. Like, for example, similarly, take, I could say, I would love for universalism to be true. My feelings would love that. I don't like the thought of anybody going to hell. So I can think through these topics, but that doesn't mean I actually believe that. I don't think that universalism is true. I don't think that's what's taught in the Bible, but my feelings, because I love humanity, but then I have to go, okay, then I get into this thing. I go, but God loves humanity more than I do, and he can't compromise his justice. And when I get to heaven and see things from his perspective, then I will understand things better. But my job right now is not to go right love wins, because my feelings feel a certain way. And so those are just a couple examples of where my feelings, I can feel strongly, but I don't feel like I can change like there's people sometimes, like the Matthew Vines approach. I think he'd be better off just saying, I'm an apostate. I no longer believe in the Bible. Non-believers can read the Bible and say, this teaches that marriage is between a man and a woman, that homosexuality is not God's plan. You don't have non-believers sitting over the Bible and trying to make the case that some of the Christians are trying to hold on to Jesus but reinterpret the Bible.
Right.
And I just feel like, for me, I'm like, God, if I ever go to that place, then just help me to be an apostate. Like, not that I want to be an apostate, not that I want to go to that place, but I just feel like that's the more consistent thing to do. So, yeah.
Well, the book covers actually quite a lot of ground. Now, the book isn't released until April 24th. Again, the title's Does Christianity Still Make Sense? A Former Skeptic Responds to Today's Toughest Objections to Christianity. And there's what, 5 parts to it? You start with kind of your own journey and talk about that, but then you start talking about the scandals. And interesting, you don't lead with maybe, and I tell this all the time, is that this is how apologetics has changed. 20 years ago, you would have led with, hey, here's why God exists, right? The Kalam or something. Yeah. Now, today it's the scandals in the church are a whole section devoted to that, or the church is non-accepting. There's another whole section. So all like kind of the traditional apologetics issues, you have argument from evil and stuff like that that's in there, and science. But you're tackling some other areas. So go ahead and tell me about that.
Yeah, that's actually really insightful, Lenny. I tried to just think about, what are some of the biggest objections? Obviously, there's more that I could have covered. And I finished the book probably a year and a half ago. With publishing these days, things move slow. It's like somebody said, or like Spurgeon once said, by perseverance, the snail reached the ark. I mean, this has been a long journey. So much has changed even in our culture since I finished the book. And that's the way it is with books being written today. But I would say, yes, the scandals are huge. So you see kind of a de-churching taking place. Well, why are people leaving the church? What's with the emergence of the so-called nuns, the NONES, those without, a religious affiliation? And so I felt like I really needed to kind of talk about this. There's people that have church trauma, and they're just struggling. And so let's talk about that. What's that?
I said that's a lot of it. Of course, Faith of the Fatherless Vits makes a big deal about how a lot of people will project their struggles with their earthly father onto God and kind of make that false equivalence. But yes, there's a lot of people who have been wronged by Christians, and therefore they think Christianity itself is responsible for that. They make the mistake of blaming the fallen individual or the sinful individual for the system, and blaming the system instead of the individual, right? You should never judge a belief system by its abuse, is how I explain it to people.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to say that too. So I'd say things like, scandals are not exclusively a church problem. They're a human problem. You have scandals wherever you have people. So every world religion, every belief system, every university, every business, every home has the potential for scandals because you have people. Yes, it's more glaring when it happens in the church because of the standard that we hold out there. But that standard that we fail to live up to, we have the solution, and that's through Jesus, who met the standard, and he's willing to forgive us for when we fall short of that standard. So I try to let people know it's not worth it. My motive is saying it's not worth walking away. You're on the fence. Don't walk away from Christianity in the name of scandals. Don't walk away in the name of hypocrisy. Jesus didn't like scandals either. In fact, he died on the cross for them. Jesus didn't like hypocrisy either. In fact, he called it out. And so I want people to see from Jesus' perspective that the problems of the church, he came to die for the church, but it didn't mean that he looked at the church like we didn't have issues. We do have issues, and we have lots of them. And so then what I did is I thought, okay, well, what kind of a culture do we live in? We live in a secular, pluralistic culture. So I deal with a lot of the one-way issues. I deal with a lot of the questions that secularism produces. And so that kind of was my approach. I end with the kind of dealing with some resurrection, but I talk about a way forward. Like, what's it look like for us as a church to navigate through such a culture of doubt? What are some things we can start doing in the local church to figure out how to help people? And so I put on my pastoral hat, and that's where I feel like my wiring as a pastor and as an apologist, I kind of feel like a misfit. When I'm with apologists, I've got this pastoral side. When I'm with pastors, I got this intellectual side. But I really try to bring those two worlds together. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's a biographical, apologetic with lots of chapters, and it moves really fast. It's got an Audible version as well that I read. So yeah, I hope people will check it out and find help. If they have anybody that they know that's suffering from doubt, it can help, but it can also help them, if they're parents, to get ahead of what this looks like, have conversations with their kids. So I really think it's up to date, and it hits the majority of tough topics that we have to go through at times in our life.
Okay, so you're and the book is so primarily directed to a Christian audience. You wouldn't necessarily hand this to a person who's a deconvert or a skeptic. They might not be the first place to start.
Yeah, I think that person could hear or read the book and be helped, because there is a lot of apologetic that's done in there to the objections that person might have. So I think there's a place for that person, but it's kind of like it's there just as a tool for the church to help us to understand what's going on in our culture, in the church. What kind of objections have historically come against the church? What are the current objections that we're up against? How do we answer these objections? And then I'm speaking to the person who's on the fence saying, hey, don't walk away on account of this. That would be silly. Here's what you're going to inherit if you do. This worldview is not going to solve this for you. And so it's just me having a conversation, a pastoral walk along in this book of just trying to help people to say, maybe we just need to stay put. This Christianity pound for pound is the best cumulative case on offer. And here's why.
And like I said, it just comes out in a couple of weeks. So we're going to make sure that we have a link to the book below the video and all
Wonderful.
of this. Anything else that we need to talk about? Did I miss something or anything on your heart?
No, I'm just thankful for the opportunity to catch up with you, Lenny. And I'm so appreciative of you and your heart for apologetics, and just your audience that's going to listen. I'm thankful for them taking the time to hear, and just would ask for prayers from those listening, that the book would help those that are hurting and be a tool. That's what you want when you write a book. You just want it to help people. And, for me, that's the scariest thing about writing a book is you always one of my prayers has been, Lord, help my character to be bigger than my platform, because it's like, I'm so aware of my own fallenness. It's like, boy, I think about how I've jacked my life up in these 51 years, and to think I could live another 40 to 50. It's like, Lord, please just protect me from me. And I'm so thankful for where I'm at in this moment, that he brought me through this torturous, and I just hope that people find hope, because there's some people that might be so stuck and think it's impossible. And that's what I felt like I was hanging by a thread. It was almost impossible for me to think that I could ever have that romance back with Jesus that I once had. And I'm so thankful to sense his presence again. And you know what? There's so much that I just could not get rid of. And it was those moments of his providential leadings in my life. It was the answers to prayer that were just so overwhelming. It was the people that I bumped into at just the right time. I just thought about the presence of God that I felt in certain moments in my life. And so when you can't see your way forward, look through the rear view mirror of God's faithfulness, and remember that even though it doesn't feel like you might be able to pull through right now, he can actually see you through. And here's my second book that I've written on doubt. And so while I didn't understand what the heck was going on, he was preparing me for a ministry to help doubters.
Yeah, that's so sweet. And I hope it gives people hope to say that no matter how low you may feel, there is a way forward, and you can. It's never with God. It's never gone for good, right? He brings people back from the dead, so therefore he can bring you back as well. So well, again, thank you, Bob. So much fun talking with you, catching up again. I'm definitely going to come out to North Carolina at some point in the near future. We'll have to have a meal and hang out. That would be great.
Yeah, that would be so much fun, Lenny. Thank you for the opportunity, bro.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.